The fountain pen lay beside a document I'd never seen before. My signature looped across the bottom in black ink that hadn't quite dried. I pressed my thumb against it and watched the smudge spread like a bruise across the paper. The transfer of majority ownership. My name. My handwriting. Except I never signed it. I sat alone in my office at Caldwell Manufacturing, fluorescent lights humming overhead, and felt the floor tilt beneath my chair. The document was dated 3 days ago, a Tuesday when I'd been home with the flu. My brother Luke had apparently needed my signature that day. Needed it badly enough to forge it. The betrayal settled into my chest like cold water filling my lungs. For 15 years, I'd kept this company running while Luke made speeches and promises. I'd balanced the books, managed the floor, stayed until midnight fixing problems he created. And now, 2 months after burying our father, he'd erased me with a pen. Luke walked in wearing father's Rolex, the one with the scratched crystal Dad refused to replace because it reminded him of his first big sale. The watch looked wrong on Luke's wrist, too loose, spinning when he gestured. "Emma, hey. Wanted to catch you before the weekend." He smiled like a politician at a town hall, all teeth and no eyes. I held up the document. "What's this?" His smile didn't waver. "Just paperwork. Legal stuff after Dad's passing. You know how it is." I pointed to my signature. "I didn't sign this." He shrugged, casual as discussing the weather. "The lawyer said we needed to consolidate ownership. I figured you'd be okay with it. You're always so easygoing about business stuff." My hands trembled against the desk. "You forged my signature." "That's a strong word," he said. "I handled logistics." "You hate dealing with lawyers anyway." "I'm Emma Caldwell, 42 years old, operations manager of a manufacturing company my father built from nothing. For 15 years, I'd arrived before dawn to check the machines, stayed late to review inventory, skipped lunches to solve problems. I knew every employee's name, every quirk of every piece of equipment. When the main press broke down 3 years ago, I was the one who crawled underneath it at 2 in the morning with a wrench and a flashlight. Luke showed up for board meetings and client dinners. He wore expensive suits and talked about vision and growth while I made sure the machines actually ran. Father called me his steady one, his backbone. He called Luke his visionary. I'd accepted those roles because family meant sacrifice. I'd believed hard work and loyalty mattered. Now I understood those words differently. Steady meant invisible. Backbone meant burden bearer. And Luke's vision apparently included erasing me entirely. Christmas 2005. I was 23, fresh out of college with an engineering degree. Luke was 28, charming his way through an MBA program he'd eventually drop out of. Under the tree that morning, Luke unwrapped keys to a new Acura. I unwrapped a leather planner with "You're so organized" engraved on the front. Father clapped Luke on the shoulder. "You'll need reliable transportation for all those client meetings." He handed me the planner with a smile. "You're always so good at keeping track of things." Luke drove his new car to Christmas dinner. I wrote our grocery list in my new planner. Mother noticed my expression and squeezed my hand. "Your father shows love differently," she whispered. "He trusts you more than Luke." That's a compliment. I'd believed her then. I'd believed trust was better than cars and compliments. But trust, I was learning, could be another word for taken for granted. Luke's MBA graduation party filled our parents' backyard with fairy lights and catered food. 200 guests clinked champagne glasses while Father stood on the porch with a microphone. "My son Luke has vision," he announced. "The kind of big picture thinking that builds empires. And my daughter Emma, she's the backbone. The steady hand that keeps everything running." Everyone cheered. Luke raised his glass and winked at me across the lawn. I smiled and applauded, even though backbone sounded like a job description, not a daughter. Later, Mother found me in the kitchen washing champagne flutes. "You should be out there celebrating," she said. "I am celebrating," I said. "Someone needs to clean up." She sighed. Emma, you don't always have to be the responsible one. But I did. That was my role. The dependable daughter who cleaned up messes and smiled through it. The one who made sacrifices so Luke could shine. Luke's first big deal came 3 years later. He'd promised a major client custom parts with a turnaround time our facility couldn't possibly meet. The contract was signed before he consulted me about production capacity. We missed deadlines. The client threatened to sue. I worked 70-hour weeks for 2 months, personally overseeing every shift, calling in favors from suppliers, redesigning our workflow. We delivered late but delivered. The client stayed. Luke never apologized. Father pulled me aside after it was over. "Don't mention this to Luke," he said quietly. "He's embarrassed enough." "He should be," I said. "He nearly bankrupted us." Father squeezed my shoulder. "He's learning. You know how to fix things. He's still figuring that out." So I said nothing. I absorbed the stress and the sleepless nights. I became the family glue, holding together what Luke kept breaking. Father's funeral happened on a Tuesday in March. Rain hammered black umbrellas while the priest spoke about legacy and family. Luke stood beside me at the graveside, his hand heavy on my shoulder. "We'll handle everything together," he whispered. "You and me, just like Dad wanted." I nodded, tears mixing with rain on my face. I'd believed him. Father had died suddenly, a heart attack in his office at 68. No warning. No time to say goodbye. Just a phone call from Luke at 6 in the morning and a world that suddenly made no sense. At the reception, Luke gave a speech about honoring Father's vision, about family and loyalty. People hugged him, told him he'd make his father proud. I stood in the corner with a plate of untouched food and wondered why grief felt like drowning. That was 8 weeks ago. Luke's hand on my shoulder. His promise of togetherness. The first lie. The courier envelope arrived on a Thursday afternoon. I'd been reviewing inventory reports when it landed on my desk with a heavy thump. Inside, new partnership papers. Legal documents transferring majority control to Luke, effective immediately. My signature already there at the bottom, black ink on white paper. Neat. Professional. Completely fake. I pulled out the original partnership agreement from my filing cabinet. The signatures didn't match. Mine had a distinctive loop on the capital E that the forgery missed. My hands shook as I laid the documents side by side. This wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. Calculated. Luke had sat somewhere, probably in his corner office, and practiced my signature until it looked close enough. Then he'd filed the papers with the state, making himself majority owner of our father's company. Making me nothing. My phone rang. Luke's name on the screen. I didn't answer. I just stared at those 2 signatures, identical twins born from betrayal. The board meeting happened the following Monday. 8 people around a mahogany table, coffee growing cold in expensive mugs. Luke stood at the head, PowerPoint slides glowing behind him. As majority partner, he began, and those 3 words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I'd known it was coming, had spent the weekend staring at those forged documents, but hearing him say it out loud made it real. The board members nodded along as Luke outlined his vision for expansion, for restructuring, for changes I knew would gut the company's efficiency. When he finished, everyone clapped. Nobody looked at me. I sat frozen, hands pressed flat against the table to keep them from shaking. After the meeting, Ted from accounting approached me. "Emma, I wanted to say, we all appreciate everything you've done here." Past tense. Everything I'd done. Like I was already gone. I packed my office that evening. 1 cardboard box for 15 years of work. Father's compass, the antique brass one he'd kept on his desk since before I was born. My coffee mug with "World's Best Engineer" that the floor crew had given me 5 Christmases ago. A small photo of Dad and me in the workshop when I was 16, both of us covered in machine grease, grinning like we'd just solved the world's problems. The photo went in last. I looked around the office one final time. The dent in the wall from when I'd kicked it after a particularly frustrating supplier meeting. The coffee ring on the desk that wouldn't come out. The view of the factory floor where I'd spent most of my adult life. I didn't slam the door when I left. I didn't lock it either. I just walked out carrying my box and didn't look back. I drove north for 3 days. Gray highways under grayer skies. Motels with thin walls and thinner coffee. Diners where the waitresses called everyone honey and nobody asked questions. The interstate stretched ahead like a question I couldn't answer. Who was I without that company? Without Father's approval and Luke's betrayals and my role as the dependable one? Each exit sign felt like a possibility. Each mile marker measured the distance between who I'd been and who I might become. My phone rang constantly. Luke. Mother. The company lawyer. I let every call go to voicemail. On the 3rd day, I found myself outside Eugene, Oregon, in a town so small it barely qualified as a town. A hand-painted sign advertised cottage rentals. I pulled into the gravel driveway and didn't leave. The cottage came with a landlady named Evelyn. She was 70-something with silver hair and hands that moved with the confidence of someone who'd spent a lifetime fixing things. She sat on her porch most evenings, repairing old radios while the sun set behind the pine trees. Manufacturing, she said when I mentioned my background. My husband ran a machine shop for 40 years. We drank tea on her porch while she soldered wires with steady hands. I told her everything. The forged signature, the betrayal, the 15 years of being invisible. She listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally. When I finished, she set down her soldering iron and looked at me. They taught you to be dependable, she said, so they could depend on you. 6 words that cracked something open inside my chest. That's not love, she continued. That's convenience. Morning became my favorite time. The air smelled like pine needles and wood smoke from someone's distant chimney. I started jogging, something I'd never had time for when I was working 70-hour weeks. The first few days, I could barely run a mile. My lungs burned, my legs ached. But I kept going. The anger that had lived in my chest for weeks began thinning with each breath, transforming into something cleaner. Something like determination. In the evenings, Evelyn taught me to weld. We stood in her garage surrounded by metal scraps and old tools, wearing heavy gloves and protective masks. Metal's honest, she said, showing me how to create a clean bead. It melts at the temperature it melts at. No manipulation. No games. I watched molten metal pool and harden under my torch, creating something new from separate pieces. It felt like magic. I'd brought my laptop, along with every digital file I'd ever saved from Caldwell Manufacturing. Late one night, unable to sleep, I opened my archive folder. Hundreds of documents organized by year and category. Financial reports, equipment manuals, supplier contracts. I scrolled through them without purpose, just looking. Then a file name caught my eye. Partnership Original Draft.pdf. I'd downloaded it years ago when Father first brought me into the business as a full partner. I'd been 25, fresh from grad school, eager to prove myself. Father had made a speech about legacy and family, about building something that would last. I opened the file. The familiar legal language filled the screen. I started reading, really reading, for the first time in years. Halfway through page 7, buried in a paragraph about dispute resolution, I found it. One sentence that changed everything. In the event of fraudulent transfer or forged documentation, all rights and ownership revert immediately to the non-offending partner, with full authority to void any transactions made under false pretenses. I read it 3 times. Then a 4th. My father's handwritten note in the margin, scanned along with the document. Emma's integrity will protect her. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. He'd known. Maybe not specifically what Luke would do, but he'd known enough to protect me. To build in a safeguard that I'd discover when I needed it most. The clause was ironclad. Any competent lawyer would recognize it immediately. Which meant Luke's lawyer either hadn't read the original agreement thoroughly, or Luke hadn't shown it to them. I sat in the dark cottage, laptop glowing, and felt something shift. Not just anger anymore. Strategy. Luke had stolen the company. Now I had the key to take it back. I spent the next week gathering proof. Old emails where Luke casually mentioned handling the paperwork. Text messages about streamlining signatures for efficiency. Screenshots of timestamps showing the partnership transfer filed while I was homesick, my phone location data proving I was nowhere near a notary. Every piece of evidence organized chronologically in a folder marked simply documentation. I found an email from Luke to his lawyer from 6 months ago, before father died. Emma won't fight for control. She's never fought for anything. Just handle it quietly after the funeral. The casual cruelty of it stung worse than the forgery. He'd been planning this while father was alive. Had probably been planning it for years. I printed everything. Highlighted key passages. Organized it with the methodical precision I'd learned from 15 years of managing complex systems. The compass father gave me sat on the cottage desk, catching afternoon sunlight. The plan formed slowly, like metal cooling into shape. I could have called Luke immediately, confronted him over the phone. I could have contacted the company lawyer, or hired my own, or filed a lawsuit. But lawsuits were loud and messy. They dragged through courts for years. They cost money and energy and turned everything public. I wanted something cleaner. More surgical. The company's annual shareholders' dinner was 6 weeks away. A formal event where Luke would give speeches about vision and legacy, where he'd stand in father's place and accept congratulations for steering the company through difficult times. My name was still on the guest list. I'd received the invitation 2 days after the forged documents, before Luke realized I'd left. I decided to attend. To walk in calmly with my folder of evidence and end his performance in front of everyone who mattered. Not revenge. Just truth. I drove back to the city on a Wednesday morning. 5 weeks of morning runs and evening welding had left me different. Stronger. The anger had transformed into something cold and focused. The highway looked familiar but felt foreign, like returning to a place you'd lived in a previous life. Billboards advertised the same products. Exit signs pointed to the same destinations. But I wasn't the same person who'd driven away. The shareholders' dinner was tomorrow night. I'd booked a room at a budget hotel near the venue, paid cash, used a different credit card than usual. Luke didn't need to know I was back until I wanted him to know. I spent the evening pressing my best suit, organizing my documentation one final time, rehearsing what I'd say. Then I decided to say almost nothing. Truth didn't need speeches. It just needed light. The hotel room smelled like lemon cleaner and industrial carpet. I lay awake most of the night, watching shadows from passing headlights cross the ceiling. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw father's face. The way he'd looked at the workshop when I was 16, proud of something I'd welded. The way he'd looked at Luke's graduation party, proud of something Luke might become. The way he'd looked in his coffin, proud of nothing anymore. Emma's integrity will protect her. His note in the margin. He'd known who I was. He'd known who Luke was. And he'd built in protection because he'd understood that integrity alone wasn't enough. Sometimes you needed leverage. At dawn, I showered and dressed. The suit fit better than it had 6 weeks ago. All those morning runs. I looked at myself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Harder. Clearer. Ready. The shareholders' dinner filled a hotel ballroom with crystal glasses and laughter. Everyone wore expensive suits and expensive smiles. I arrived late, slipping in as appetizers were being served. Nobody noticed me at first. I'd chosen a seat at the back, near the exit. Luke stood at the front table, surrounded by board members and investors. He wore father's watch and father's confident smile. The dinner progressed through courses. Salad. Soup. Entrees that cost more than most people's grocery budgets. Luke gave a speech between the main course and dessert. He talked about father's legacy, about family values, about steering the company into a bright future. My father would be proud of what we've built, he said, raising his glass. Everyone applauded. I waited until dessert. Waited until the room was full of chocolate and satisfaction. Then I stood and walked to Luke's table. I placed a slim folder beside his dessert plate. Luke looked up, his smile freezing when he recognized me. Emma. I didn't know you were coming. Surprise. I kept my voice level. You forgot something. He glanced at the folder without opening it. Not here. We can discuss business later. Open it, I said. The conversations around us had started to quiet. People were noticing. Luke's lawyer sat 2 seats down, a woman named Patricia who specialized in corporate law. She reached for the folder when Luke didn't move. I watched her face as she read. Watched comprehension dawn, then concern, then something like panic. She flipped through the pages faster. The original partnership agreement. The forged transfer document. The emails. The highlighted clause. Luke, Patricia said quietly. Her voice carried in the silence. We need to talk. Now. Luke stammered something about misunderstandings. Patricia kept reading, her professional composure cracking. Ms. Caldwell, she said finally, looking at me. This clause. You're aware of its implications? Completely, I said. She turned to Luke. Did you show me the original partnership agreement before we filed the transfer? Luke's face had gone pale. We discussed it. You knew. We discussed a transfer of ownership between siblings after your father's death, Patricia said, her voice sharp. You said Emma was on board. You never mentioned forged signatures. You never showed me this clause. The board members were listening now. Forks had stopped moving. One by one, people pushed back their chairs to hear better. The clause makes any fraudulent transfer null and void, Patricia continued. It gives Ms. Caldwell full control pending investigation. Luke, you've potentially committed fraud. Luke's eyes finally showed what I'd waited months to see. Uncertainty. Fear. The realization that charm couldn't fix this. I didn't gloat. Didn't raise my voice. I simply looked at Luke and said, you have 2 choices. Resign quietly, tonight, and keep whatever dignity you have left. Or fight this, and I'll pursue criminal charges for forgery and fraud. The ballroom had gone completely silent. Luke's mouth opened and closed. Patricia pulled him aside, their whispered conversation urgent and harsh. The board members exchanged looks. The investors suddenly found their desserts fascinating. 10 minutes later, Luke returned to the table. His face was gray, the Rolex hanging loose on his wrist. I'll resign, he said quietly. Patricia produced a resignation letter she'd apparently drafted on her phone. Luke signed it with the same fountain pen he'd probably used to forge my signature. The irony wasn't lost on me. Effective immediately, Patricia said, sliding the paper to me. You'll resume full operational control pending legal resolution. I folded the resignation letter carefully. Put it in my folder. Looked at Luke one last time. Goodbye, I said. Then I walked out. 6 months later, I sold my share of Caldwell Manufacturing to a larger firm. The sale gave every employee better benefits and job security. I kept father's compass and one framed photo from my office. With the money, I opened a small metalworking studio an hour outside Eugene. I called it Compass Foundry. The space was modest, clean, with high ceilings and good light. I made custom pieces, architectural elements, art sculptures. Work that required precision and patience and let me create something beautiful from raw materials. Evelyn visited most weekends. We'd work side by side, welding and shaping, talking about everything and nothing. Luke sent one email, 3 months after the dinner. An apology that read like his lawyer wrote it. I deleted it without responding. Some things couldn't be fixed with words. Mother called occasionally, awkward conversations about weather and guilt. I kept them short. Forgiveness would take time. Maybe forever. Morning sunlight spilled through the studio windows, warming the concrete floor. The kettle whistled in my small office area. I poured tea and carried it to my workbench, where Father's compass hung on the wall. Polished brass catching the light. The needle pointing true north. I had a commission due next week, a decorative gate for a community garden. The design sketch lay beside my coffee mug, clean lines and practical beauty. Exactly the kind of work Father would have appreciated. Work built on integrity, not charm. On skill, not promises. I picked up my welding mask and gloves. Outside, birds called to each other. The smell of metal and possibility filled the air. I looked at the compass one more time, remembering Father's note. Emma's integrity will protect her. He'd been right. But integrity alone hadn't been enough. I'd needed to protect myself. To stand up. To reclaim what was mine. It's not about what you inherit, I said to the empty studio, my voice steady and sure. It's about what you build after they try to take it.